past week. He escaped house arrest. He took refuge in the US Embassy for the past 6 days. Today it looked as though there was a breakthrough. He walked from the embassy a free man. He was taken to a hospital for medical treatment, reunited with a family. But now there has been a complete backflip. Speaking to him, he says that he feels he's been let down by the United States. He says while he was in the embassy, he was not given the full story. He was cut off from the news and he was encouraged to leave. When he left, he went to the hospital, he met his wife, and his wife told him what had been happening to her ever since he fled. She told him that the guards who were locking them down in their village took her away, tied her to a chair and interrogated her. They said that they were waiting for them with weapons back in their house. Chen Guangcheng told me very clearly that if he stays in China, he fears for his life. Initially, he wanted to stay in the country. There were undertakings given from the Chinese government to the United States that he'd be able to live here as a free man. He says that is no longer going to be the case. He wants to leave, and he wants to leave as soon as possible. He's made this appeal directly to President Barack Obama himself, saying you must do more about human rights in China. He wants to leave China. If he stays here, he says he will not live. As far as his wife is concerned, she says this is not a country she wants to bring her children up in. She says she feels as if they no longer have a future here. A very, very different story to the one we were hearing earlier from the United States. The US was insisting that he was happy to leave. The US was insisting that this was a deal that they would monitor and he would have a safe future in this country. He's now disputing that. He's saying the US, in fact, let him down. He was encouraged to leave without all the information, and now he wants to get out of China. Brooke?
Stan, can you be more specific when you say that he says that the US let him down? Let him down how?
He says that he was not given all the information about what was happening on the outside. Now remember, since he fled, people who have assisted him, some of his supporters, when they've spoken to the media, including CNN, they've been rounded up and arrested. Some of them are still under house detention right now. Others have been detained and questioned. There have been threats made against his family. He says that his wife, as we mentioned before, was tied up and interrogated, that the message was from the local Chinese Communist Party officials in his province that they were waiting for them there with weapons. He says he should have been told all this information before he left the embassy. Once he left the embassy, he was then at the mercy of the Chinese government. He says right now they are in the hospital room. His wife says she is not even free to leave the hospital. She doesn't feel safe, and the authorities and the guards there won't allow her to leave the hospital. In that way, he says he was not given the full story and he feels let down. He says this can be remedied if the United States opens its doors and allows him to leave here. Otherwise, as I mentioned before, he was very clear to me, if they stay here, he feels that their lives will be in danger.
Did he explain to you, Stan, how he pulled off this escape from being under house arrest, blind, scaling a wall, crossing a creek? And did he have help?
What a story, yeah. An extraordinary story. He did have help. He had help waiting for him on the outside. But this is an extraordinary saga. What he did was, for the months leading up to this, he had planned this escape. He'd pretended to be sick, that he would not be able to move from his bed. He spent hours on his bed, asleep, pretending to be ill. His captors dropped their guard. They thought he was no threat to them. He used to listen to them outside at night. He worked out their movements, where they would go, when they would come back, what times they were around. And when he saw his moment under cover of darkness, he made his run for it. Remember, a blind man scaling walls. He crossed a river. He'd fallen down repeatedly. It took him 1 day to get clear. He then found a rendezvous car. He'd been in touch with his supporters, and in that vehicle they were able to bring him to Beijing and ultimately to the US Embassy. It took several days before the authorities, before the guards actually realized that he'd left. Once he'd left, that's when the threat started. That's when the crackdown started on his family. And that's when it was made very clear to his wife, if he stayed in the embassy, they were going to be in danger. He left the embassy in good faith, he says. Now he feels as though that good faith has been exhausted, that trust has been exhausted. He wants to get out of here. He doesn't trust China, and he wants to go to the United States. Brooke?
So when you talk about how he's angry with the U.S., that the U.S. misled him, and that after speaking with his wife that she was tied down and interrogated? Am I to assume that the interrogations happen after he fled house arrest, or this is prior to?
Yeah. No, there's been a history of brutality and violence. If you listen to Chen Guangcheng, he said this has been going on for some time now. He says that he'd been beaten, his wife had been beaten, his mother had been beaten repeatedly, that the guards had scoffed at them and said, we're above the law, there's nothing you can do to us. He said this has been going on for the 18 months that he'd been kept under house arrest. What had happened since, though, is that they'd increased those efforts. They wanted to know where he was. They wanted to know how he got away, who helped him, which is why they took his wife, tied her, he says, and interrogated her for many hours, which is why he says the message now from the officials is, if you stay at the embassy, we're waiting for your wife and family here with weapons in your house. He also said that the guards have said that they installed cameras inside the house where they can watch their every move, and they'll be taken back there and never be able to leave again. You must remember though, Brooke, of course, this is an emotional man. It's 3 a.m. here in the morning now. He's been up for many, many hours. He's been in this extraordinary situation, escaping, hiding out in the embassy, a man whose health has not been great, a man who's been the centre of this extraordinary attention around the world. Obviously, emotion is running very, very high right now.
But as you bring up his frustrations with the U.S. Embassy, have you reached out to the embassy? What is the embassy telling CNN?
Yeah, we'd spoken to US officials a little bit earlier in the night, and they were insisting that he'd left the embassy in good faith. They say that they have protocols and that they'd followed those protocols. They asked him 3 times separately, are you able to willingly leave the embassy? Do you want to go? He said yes to each of those requests. I think what we're seeing here is that all sides are telling the truth, but each side does not have the full information. When he says when he left the embassy, he did not know how bad the situation was outside. He did not know about the threats. He did not know what was being done to his wife. He said what he wished for was that the people inside the embassy had been more honest with him, that they had kept him abreast of the news. He was cut off from the news. He didn't know what this whole story that was swirling around him. And he said he wanted more information. He feels as if he's made the decision without having all the information in front of him, and that he was also encouraged to leave. Having left the embassy, he's now at the mercy of the Chinese government.
So now, even though he feels misled by the United States, he doesn't want to stay in China. He wants to come to the United States. As you point out, he's making this appeal to President Obama. We heard President Obama in a news conference a couple of days ago with the Prime Minister of Japan. He was asked about that, and the president didn't say very much, just said he was aware of the news reports and that, you know, obviously the issue of human rights come up every time the U.S. Is speaking with China. Stan Grant, I appreciate your reporting there for us from Beijing, really through this whole week, even when you were chased away from their home trying to find the family. Stan, we appreciate you.